Hey, Emma,
Yes, Madelyn.
what do you call that final breakup text to someone you dated?
I don't know. What do you call it?
The last of XCOM. Hello, and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your eaten by a clicker host, Madelyn.
I'm your shot by aliens host, Emma.
And welcome to the show. I always know it's a good joke when in the little pause we take, Emma goes, like visually. Like, not, she doesn't do it on audio, because it's a podcast, of course, but she kind of like nods. Calm, like, communications.
Yes. Yeah, I got it. I understood. It took me a moment.
I just saw the thought process, so I wanted to make sure the audience also had that,
Yeah.
moment.
Ah, yes, the extra M in there.
Yes.
That's what was going through my head, in case you were wondering.
So this week, we're talking about XCOM, with or without the dash, I guess. With or without the dash is 10 years old, so either way. And The Last of Us Part 1, which, yes, is the new game.
Yep.
It's not old enough to be the old game. Is The Last of Us still eligible to be the old game after that? Be an old game after this?
Maybe. I think next year it'll be eligible. Like late next year.
Yeah.
We could do it.
We don't usually do multiple games in a series. But we have now lost the opportunity to have a full The Last of Us Part 1 episode.
Ah.
Alas. Maybe Horizon Zero Dawn. No, we've already done that one too. Never mind. Back when it was a new game.
Oh, yeah.
Soon it will be a new game again, if rumors are to be believed.
Oh, man.
But first, time for some alien strategy. Alien invaders. It's XCOM. Short for extraterrestrial combat.
So, to be honest, I watched some XCOM gameplay, and it very much feels like a game that, like, you get by playing it, you know?
Yeah.
'Cause I watched it, and I was like, I don't understand what's happening very well.
That's almost universally true of strategy-type games, right? That either you watch it and you're like, I don't know what's happening, or you watch it and you're like, this is pretty boring. Like, more power to you that you enjoy watching other people play Fire Emblem. I really enjoy Click Like Boyfriend playing Fire Emblem and me getting to, like, look up sometimes. You know? I don't usually kind of, like, watch it intently. The way he is intently watching me play The Last of Us. Or anything like that. And I feel like the same thing is sort of true with... I say this about Civilization, although fond childhood memories of watching Dad play Civilization. So I'm just giving examples over and over where this is not the case. But hey, for me personally, as an adult, it's harder to watch people play strategy games. There's too much going on.
Well, I think my issue with XCOM is there's, like, two distinct parts to XCOM.
Yeah.
Which I sort of knew, but didn't really actually know until I started looking into it for this episode. There's the turn-based strategy part, where you fight aliens on a map with your little soldier dudes. And then there's, like, a real-time, like, strategy city building part, sort of.
You have to, like, manage make sure the nations don't decide to pull out of XCOM because they're freaked out.
Yeah, like, you're, like, getting funding from other nations, you're making contacts, you're upgrading your troops, you're creating, like, buildings that help upgrade your stuff, and then, like, every once in a while there's, like, oh, there's a new thing, and you sort of have to choose, like, where you defend on the map, also, strategically. So you don't necessarily do, like, every battle that pops up in a way you might in Fire Emblem, but you, like, pick them based on where you need to be at that time. So
XCOM, to loop back here a little bit, so we're starting to talk about what the game is. First one to come out in 1994, X-Com, UFO Defense, from British studio Mythos Games, the Gollop brothers, mostly. And published by Microprose, which was founded and run in a lot of ways by Sid Meier of Civilization fame before he left to found Firaxis. And so it originally came out for what Wikipedia refers to as DOS, which is really like Microsoft computers mostly, and Amiga computers, and then the Amiga console and PlayStation.
Yes.
And it was originally planned as a sequel to Mythos' 1988 game Laser Squad, but eventually sort of became its own thing, which, like Emma said, it's part real-time management simulator, part turn-based tactic thing, all quite difficult and evidently quite addictive for people.
Yeah. My impression of people who like XCOM is like once you're into XCOM, you're really into XCOM.
You're trapped for life.
Yeah, you're stuck there forever.
Which is another, like, when I actually looked at this game, I was like, oh, I sort of didn't realize that, like, there was an accessible remake of the first one that, like, maybe I could have played. It does seem like it's probably for the best that I didn't. These are the kinds of games, like, just reading the words Civilization on some of the pages about XCOM made me, like, giggle nervously to myself a little bit. About, like, oh, like, I'm gonna be on a flight soon. Like, maybe I should download Civilization.
It is from the Sid Meier. It's just Sid Meier. His
literally
company.
No strategy game. Like, I wouldn't be surprised for a minute if people were like, oh yeah, like Sid Meier like popped over to help with Fire Emblem. Like, wouldn't be surprised at all.
He's got your brain in a jar and just studies it for his game design.
No, it's like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I haven't let myself get like Civilization 6 because I'm so used to 5. Anyway, I won't just talk about Civilization here, but my point being that, like, this does... those kind of, like, just one more turn, addictive games are things that I don't resist very well. And so I think it's for the best that I opted to play the same section of The Last of Us that I've played now, like, 3 times instead for this week's show.
It is only sort of accessible. It's on the PlayStation 3, I believe, the 2012 one.
You're right. Maybe I'm thinking like XCOM 2 is on like even the like literally the Switch.
Yeah. Yeah, XCOM 2 is on it's on the last generation of platforms now, I guess, but still more easily accessible than PS3 titles, even with your PS3.
I just would have had to download for the entire 2 weeks since this is pulled from the hat.
Exactly.
But XCOM, both of them, both the 1994 game and the 2012 sort of remake of the 1994 game, both of them broadly hailed as greatest games of all time. The 2012 remake is the one that's on the Wikipedia page right now, but the original, for a while, was like IGN's like best game ever, basically. So that gives you a sense of like what we're dealing with here. It's like the cream of the crop of strategy games for a really long time. And still, for many people.
Yeah.
But not without a rocky production history.
Yeah. Was the original rocky? Because everything I read about it seemed to be like... I read an interview with one of the... what's his last name? Gallup?
Yeah, Gallup.
Right? Who was just like, we kind of all just like did our thing and then just like put it together at the end. And it worked.
I did read about the first one that it was supposed to take 18 months and it took 30. And that it was almost canceled several times. And then Microprose, like, I'm not exactly sure if they were totally bought out or they just had like a significant shareholder like turnover to this other company, Spectrum something. And that company was like, you're going to cancel this. And the Microprose bosses were like, we're just not going to say anything.
Yeah.
And so they
I read about that in that interview. He didn't know. He hadn't heard about that until like he did a talk on like the making of XCOM and he talked with some of the other people who worked on it. And he apparently just genuinely didn't know that it was under threat of being canceled at some point because they just did not tell them.
Imagine that happening now. Imagine someone being like, the game's canceled, and somebody else just being like, we're just not going to tell them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'd be able to get away with that for like 2 days now, maybe. But then it just continues to get like rockier and weird, right? This game comes out, it sells awesome. The developers are like, it was around the time that X-Files was really popular, so we think people thought it was X-Files.
That works. Hey, that works. You know,
yeah, take what you
whatever
get.
works.
And then like they immediately, like the publisher was like, we need to have another one right away, and the developers were like, that's not possible. Like, there's just not that much we can do that fast. So they just, like, licensed it and, like, reskinned it. And it was, like, water aliens instead of space aliens.
Yeah.
And, like, immediately released a second one a year later that was just, like, basically the first one, but harder. Which in itself is a pretty funny thing.
Yeah.
Because the first one had this glitch that like player modders ultimately fixed, but the company wasn't aware of, that after the first, so Emma talked about this, right? There are kind of two parts of the game. There's the geoscape and the battlescape. And the geoscape is like, you're looking at the globe and you're doing management and resource allocation and budgeting and that kind of thing. Really exciting stuff when you say it out loud like that.
Yeah.
And then there's the battlescape, which is like, yeah, you send your soldiers out and they all get slaughtered by aliens, basically. Most of the time, seemingly. But in the original game, after your very first battlescape battle, there was a glitch that would reset the difficulty to the lowest, to beginner, no matter what, and there was nothing you could do to fix it. So players made a mod for that fixed that. But because of that, the company got a lot of feedback from players being like, this is way too easy, even on the most difficult levels. And of course that was because everyone was playing on beginner. But I thought that was a really funny reason. So they made that second one like much more difficult because of this feedback. Even though the feedback was just like as a result of a bug.
That's funny.
So I guess the QA guys were just like thrilled to be good at the game.
I guess so, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it has, Wikipedia refers to it as having like a cult following, which I just feel like strategy games aren't allowed to just have like a following.
Yeah, well, I think the first game was pretty popular.
Yeah.
Like, just straight up popular. But now I think you're seeing a lot more strategy games, but none of them are like, you know. Three Houses is probably the most popular one.
Yeah. But then after those two games came out and then the original company released like one more sequel, things get really messy for the XCOM series. Basically there's like, they try to make, I think it's XCOM Alliance. XCOM Alliance gets all sorts of promo buzz and like wins like some gaming press like best of E3 kind of situation, and then never comes out because of various kind of like the IP is handed off to different people, the company is sold and then shuttered, and so there really is for like 13 years until this remake in 2012, like there's a few little XCOM things here and there, but nothing that's like really a mainline game with that turn-based system.
Yeah. Although for the remake, they had been starting and restarting development on it since 2003.
Yeah.
So they were working on XCOM the whole time. Just not good versions of XCOM.
Like, how much time did they waste where they were like, we're working on XCOM, but really what they were doing was playing the old XCOM, do you think?
I don't know, Mel.
It's like the game is so addictive. Probably they spent like 2 years being like, we're going to do this. But they were like, just one more turn of XCOM for research. Just one more game for research.
No, what seems to have actually happened is Jake Solomon, like, kept picking it up and trying, like, leading a development team to try and make an XCOM game. And, like, they would get a little bit into it, and Fraxis would be like, you know what, this doesn't seem like it's fun, actually, so let's shut this down and try something else. And then finally, it seems like on the third time, they got it correct. and ended up releasing the game in 2012.
Which was also sort of an instant classic of the genre. And people really like XCOM 2 and its associated DLC as well. And then there's been some XCOM stuff in the past couple of years, not all of which is super traditional, which has not been as well received, I believe. But that probably means, I bet you we're due for a new one. Now that there's a new console generation, I bet you we're due for a new one in the next couple of years. That's my guess.
Yeah, I think the last one was Chimera Squad in 2020. Yeah. So it hasn't been that long.
That's true. You're right. I'm just thinking of like XCOM and XCOM 2, which it's so weird to me that they were like, we're gonna remake this, but the difference we're gonna make is we're gonna drop the hyphen. So now it's XCOM no hyphen.
It looks cooler, to be honest.
It does look cooler. Dashes are not cool, says Emma. Yeah. That's Emma's proclamation here. Dashes not cool.
Take like 4 points out of the cool factor.
You heard it here first. But I don't know if it improves the searchability. I mean, it just makes the Wikipedia pages a little easier, I guess. But it does not improve the searchability, I think, to have XCOM.
I guess so. They're the same series, though. So, you know.
I know, but just the confusion for people like me.
I see. Well, the original was like UFO Defender, was a UFO Enemy Unknown if you were in Europe.
Enemy Within.
You wouldn't be confused.
You're right. Okay, I'm just stupid, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, you should live in Europe, that's what I'm saying. Because then you wouldn't be confused.
So, story of XCOM, in case you were wondering, in case you weren't immediately hooked by the, like, it's aliens, and you have a budget.
Clearly it is fun, but I think the reason why, like, strategy games just cannot go, like, fully mainstream is if you try to talk about them, it does not sound fun.
Yeah.
Sounds awful. Like, math? Get me away from that, you know?
So in XCOM, the story is that all these, individual nations, there's like an alien invasion coming. And all the individual countries have like tried to fight the aliens, but it's not going well. So they all get together in Geneva and they're like, let's make XCOM, which is this like international military force that's gonna fight the aliens, right? And ultimately you discover that the aliens, they're being led by the ethereals, who are aliens with like mind control that basically just want to enslave every place they capture, basically. And so your goal is going to be to destroy the ethereals and the alien brain computer that's running this invasion. And there's bad endings where like everybody dies brutally or is enslaved. And then a good one where you win. But it seems like the one where everyone dies brutally and is enslaved is the canon ending, unfortunately.
Yeah. That would make sense.
Yeah.
If you are into, like, if you're like, you've played Fire Emblem and you're like, oh, maybe I should try XCOM. The combat is a little, like, a few steps more complicated than Fire Emblem, I'd say. Like, Fire Emblem's built on its rock, paper, scissors formula, and then adds some stuff, like, on top of that. And XCOM, as far as I was able to tell, doesn't have anything, like, at that base. Like, there's a bunch of different enemy types that do different things. There's a bunch of different soldier types that do different things. And it's a little bit more, like, free-form in trying to find the best strategy for what's happening versus where there might be a clear best strategy.
It also kind of
something else
bucks the video game tradition of everybody can take a few bullets before they die most of the time. In XCOM, pretty much if your soldiers get shot, they're probably dead. It does not buck the Fire Emblem tradition, though, of if you have a less than 90% chance to hit, it won't hit.
Yeah. That's key. That's key to the strategy genre, of course.
Key to the strategy genre, even though there's a lot of math, is a misunderstanding of how percentages work. Something I noticed a lot about some reviews of this were, I mean, of course, everyone sort of says over and over and over, it's impossible to put down, right? But some of the reviews even call out that it's like, it's so impossible to put down that it feels a little gross. that like it's so designed to make you kind of do one more turn, that it feels a little bit like you're being manipulated, but you can't do anything about it.
I guess. I'm only concerned about that form of design when it's paired with, like, microtransactions.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I agree.
If it's something that you've just bought and it's like that, whatever, right?
Yeah.
If it's genuine, like, they're not actually benefiting from you playing like that, even if it's designed like that in any particular way.
Right.
So as long as they're not, like, genuinely exploiting you, then that's just a form of design.
Then you have no one to blame but yourself.
I mean, you can still blame them.
Yeah.
Just, I don't think it's that gross. As long as it's not, like, genuinely taking advantage of you.
But it made me wonder, I don't know. I really enjoy games that kind of have that just one more turn vibe. And I'm trying to think of, like, what makes a game have those qualities, right? It's just, like, tons of overlapping objectives, I think, for me.
I mean, it's the idea of flow, right?
Yeah, I know.
You're just always in that. That's for all games that you can't put down. They keep you in that state where you're feeling good.
It's just so interesting to me, though, that, like, turn-based strategy games, I feel like, on one hand, turn-based strategy games do not immediately call out to me as, like, yes, the masters of flow. Games where you do a lot of math and there's a lot of squares. Like, those are the games where I forget the time goes by. And yet, they do. Like, that doesn't make any sense, right? If, like, the idea, like, sometimes flow is talked about in, you know, in conjunction, right, with, like, immersion and that sort of thing. And not to say, like, obviously you do get very immersed in these strategy games, but it's funny to me that it's like numbers.
Secretly,
that's the
we
thing.
all love doing math.
Maybe if everybody just played XCOM instead of algebra.
I think that would work.
It sounds like that's Ender's Game, right?
That is Ender's Game, yeah.
But people playing XCOM, another notable thing about, like, a lot of conversation around XCOM is people get very attached to their characters and their soldiers. Too many people were like, I named it after my wife, my soldier. It's like, man, did you know what you were getting yourself into?
They do have, like, at least the remake has a nice little mourning area, you know, where your soldiers go. You can go pay them respects in your other mode, your geopolitics mode. Yeah. So they're never forgotten.
I don't know. It was like one of the developers. He was like, I named it after my wife, but, like, I always keep her in the back so she doesn't die. It's like, that's nice, but why would you create that problem for yourself in the first place?
It's for immersion.
Yeah, you're right.
Emotional stakes.
I guess if you're playing it over and over again, you have to give yourself some of that spice.
Yeah, the chance of getting your wife killed. Adding that spice to your life.
Real spicy. I don't know, the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, maybe I should get XCOM, but absolutely should not.
We'll check back. We'll see if you've gotten it 6 weeks from now.
I have so many games, Emma. I have so many games.
Get more games.
So you ready for...
Yeah.
They're not zombies. Even The Last of Us, they're not zombies. So.
They aren't zombies, no.
Here we are. It's The Last of Us, part 1.
At least I appreciate The Last of Us as, like, that there's this is exactly what is causing this, and that's why they're not zombies. I feel like other games, it's just like, they're zombies, but we don't want to say that they're zombies, you know? I appreciate the work to avoid the zombie term. That's all I'm saying.
Fair enough. So, The Last of Us Part 1 is the second remake in 9 years.
No.
The Last of Us.
It's a remake, not a remaster.
You're right. It's a remake. It's the third release of a game with the same story in 9 years. Of a game called The Last of Us, which you may have heard of. It's significant in gaming history. Because it invented narrative.
Invented narrative? Invented dads?
It did invent dads, you're right.
Who knows what else it invented?
Except for people who put their dad into their XCOM squad. They kind of invented dads earlier.
That's true.
Just a note. So The Last of Us Part 1 came out earlier this year, which is unbelievable because it feels like it came out like a bajillion years ago. It's been a weird year.
September.
What?
September. Last month.
No, it didn't.
Didn't it?
I mean, I'm sure you're right, but that's unbelievable. It can't be that it
September
came out.
2nd.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable it came out last month. It definitely came out at least 3 months ago. And The Last of Us Part 1 also notable as being among the first of what will soon be the ubiquitous $70 PS5 gen price.
They've been doing that for a while.
Not everybody is doing it though. Like it's rolling. I feel like it's rolling out in force now.
Yeah.
So for that reason, because I both have the disc, I think for the PS3, The Last of Us, and because I now have access to the free remastered thing on my PS5 for the PS4 version, I opted to just play the remastered version. I'm sorry, I realize it's kind of cheating that the whole point of part 1 is to weigh in on the like better graphics, but I just couldn't do it. Because would you believe, I am still unbelievably bad at this game. I'm still so bad. I don't know what's wrong with me.
I don't know if you would be better at... so one of the big improvements beyond just the graphical upgrades is the AI is brought much more in line with like part 2's AI. The part 1 AI, the original, this is going to be really confusing. The PS3, PS4's version AI is kind of a mess, to be perfectly honest. I remember noticing this when I played it, and like this is probably one area where the improvements show themselves, but they just sort of run around like randomly. Like if you watch them, it sort of feels like they are responding to like prioritizationing things, but like doing them all at once. So they're like, oh, well, we've been damaged, we should jump behind cover, but oh, wait, no, but we have to attack because we're the last one left, and sort of response and them just sort of running back and forth.
Yeah.
In sort of more random motions. Whereas if you watch part 1's AI, they're a lot more purposeful in what they're actually doing. Which may or may not have helped you. I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah, well, I would appreciate Tess getting her freaking act together and not like, shooting when there are clickers around. I don't think I want smarter enemies.
The ally AI is also smarter. All the AI in the original kind of does this. It's not game breaking, but it's just noticeable when you're playing it. Like, what are you doing?
Well, I hope they fixed. I was walking down a little water part, and I watched the leaves float through the wall. So I hope they fixed that. That alone. That alone, I was like, oh, guess we need to redo this whole game. Because the leaves kind of weirdly floated down the water through the wall. So I watched him do it. So also, I couldn't fix my flashlight. I don't know if that's the DualSense being weird or if it was just a weird glitch. My flashlight blinked out and it was like, shake the controller. And I sure did. I shook my controller for like 3 minutes. And
did you turn it off accidentally while shaking your controller?
My controller? No.
Your flashlight?
No, it was still blinking.
Okay. Weird.
Anyway, all of this contributes to the absolute necessity of a remake. Anyway, I played I played the first like chunk of The Last of Us on the PlayStation 3, I don't know, a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I've played more or less that same chunk for the podcast. I aim to finish it this time. I will stick with it. I will just say before we talk more about the game and more about the new version and that sort of thing, I'm bad at this. And I'm trying to be stealthy. Man, one time I died because Joel threw the brick into the thing I was hiding behind. And I just feel like the game should have some safeguards for like, this man has survived for 20 years. Like, he wouldn't throw a brick into the thing he's hiding behind.
It should just have some dumb player safeguards. That's what you're saying?
I just feel like it should be like, even if the player is bad, there are certain things that like this character would not do.
Okay, sure.
He should be like, he can start to throw it and be like, oh, that's dumb, and put it away.
he's getting old, Sometimes he just accidentally throws a brick where he doesn't wanna. I think that's what happens when you ages. You
my
can
one
no
more
longer...
game anecdote before we wade into the weeds of just like this remake is I really thought, and maybe this will become relevant as we talk about potentially some plot elements in the second half here, but I really thought that The Last of Us, I didn't think it had quite reached this level, but I sort of thought that the sort of story beats of the game had reached the level of like Eric dies kind of thing, where it's like, it's not even really a spoiler anymore, like everybody just knows, right? And I thought that until I started playing, and Click Click Boyfriend was like, I don't really know anything about this game other than like the meme of you guys being like invented storytelling. So he's like, Joel dies in this game, right? He dies at the end. And I was like, And when I played the beginning part before the jump forward, he was like, like that's the girl. And she died. He was like, what? And they jump forward.
That's just on him not looking at the box art, not looking close. He's face blindness for small children, I guess.
Well, when Ellie appeared, he was like, oh, that's the girl. But yeah, that he had like jumped forward. And he's like, oh, I thought he looked a little weird. I thought he looked a little different.
I'm glad he's enjoying watching you, it seems like.
I know, I'm like almost doing a Click Click Boyfriend one-off, because he keeps being like, I don't think this woman you're hanging out with is a good influence. He's like, I'm not rooting for Joel. He's killed a lot of people. I'm not rooting for him. Just a lot of commentary. Anyway, it made me realize that perhaps I am a little too steeped in all of this, because I sort of thought that The Last of Us was something that had achieved a greater level of cultural saturation, perhaps. And I'm realizing that is perhaps not the case.
I think it's not a story that has, like, iconic spoilers, I think. It's sort of too low-key for that, from my memory of it.
I feel like the ending is a sort of iconic spoiler.
I guess. I would say that
not
part 2 has more, like, iconic potential to be iconic spoilers.
That's fair.
Than the first game.
I think that's fair, and I think that's because some of those don't come right at the end, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think that tends to make a spoiler more iconic. But I don't know. I just felt like it's just a good reminder that not everybody knows anything about video games. Like, Click Click Boyfriend pays attention to this kind of thing to some degree, and still was like, I doesn't know anything about this, like, incredibly, like, touchstone of a game, like, generation-defining game.
Well, to get into the weeds a little bit, and speaking of your Final Fantasy VII mention, I think that Final Fantasy VII Remake has just broken what the word remake means.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Because I see a lot of people being like, oh, like, this remake, like, Last of Us Part 1 is not a remake, it's a remaster. And that's just not true.
No, they definitely rebuilt it. And there are things that are different in how things work. Yeah.
I mean, because it is not as, like, revolutionary remake as the Resident Evil remakes or Final Fantasy VII or anything like that.
Well, Final Fantasy VII is, like, not even... I think it's... Like, obviously they're using the word remake there in a thematic way.
Yeah.
I think rather than in a... like.
But even using the Resident Evil ones, Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3, that are significantly changed gameplay-wise, and even, I think, a little bit story-wise as well, in addition to, like, clearly updated graphics, have been like, well, you have to make a ton of changes for it to be really a remake. But really all a remaster is, generally, is, like, sort of like an upscale. Not that simple, obviously, but it's just, it fixes it so it can run, like, natively on new hardware. It increases texture resolution, maybe they make a few, like, model changes or something, but, like, a remaster is not that much work, but it's it's clear that while things are not that different in part 1, it is a remake. They remade and it's not even like they took stuff from part 2 entirely and just put it in the game. The models are different from part 2. They remade the environments. They made it so things worked better, essentially. So clearly, regardless of whether you think it's necessary, they did put a lot of work into this. It's just whether you think there was a need to do that work in the first place, I guess.
And it seems like Naughty Dog has done a lot of work in reforming their work culture as well.
Yes. They've made some changes, yes.
Not to say, look, I think it sucks to work in games no matter where you work, probably. But compared to all of the press around The Last of Us Part 2 and what that process was like there's so many different reasons that there's a lot of kind of like rawr around this particular remake. And so like one thing that I'll like sort of remove from the equation for us here is it's like, it seems like the process for making this game was closer to a healthy process, whatever that means in games, than their last one. So
yeah,
plenty of reasons to around this. But that one at least moving more towards a footnote about the Last of Us Part 2.
In some ways, a remake of something like The Last of Us seems like an ideal project to take on when you're trying to fix your work culture.
Yeah.
Because it's familiar, you're able to work with stuff that's already done and maybe figure out how to go from there versus starting something from scratch and having to like fully deal with like pre-production and stuff.
Yeah, you can imagine the bottlenecks are probably easier to avoid.
Yeah.
Because it's not like you're having to be like, well, I need someone to tell me what happens next.
Yeah.
To start on this.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. It's unclear to me what drove the creation of this game. There's a lot of like talk around it lately that seems like Sony in particular really wanted it.
Well, it was initially at another studio.
Right.
And then their work wasn't, they didn't like their work or whatever. And it ended up moving back to Naughty Dog for them to do it. So there is that. So it does seem like it is something that Sony wanted, considering it wasn't like a Naughty Dog initiated project. Yeah.
And everyone has been careful to say, like, we're not doing this because of the TV show. We're not doing this just because of the TV show. But of course the TV show is coming, and they won't let the actress play the game.
I think that's interesting, actually.
They broke her fingers.
I don't think they broke her fingers.
They smashed her TV.
Maybe they smashed her TV. I don't think they broke her fingers, though.
They manufactured the PS5 shortage crisis.
That's probably it, yeah.
Just so she couldn't play it. I do think that that's one reason. Like, I think if the PlayStation 5 had been easily accessible, I think that there would have been a little bit less animosity toward this. So I think part of the reason that it feels so, like, whatever. And of course the PlayStation 5 is starting now, like, since I got it, basically, I feel like, to become easier to get. But I do think if everybody who'd wanted one had had a PlayStation 5 for the past 2 years, it would feel a little bit less like, why do we need this, than it did.
Yeah. So I watched I watched an hour-long comparison video from Digital Foundry between part 1, mostly the remaster, and a little bit with part 2 as well. Some comparisons there. It was really interesting to watch it and see. Because you can like watching that and breaking it down, even when you first look at it, you're like, that doesn't look very different.
Yeah.
When you're like really looking at it, you're like, oh, okay. I see all of the improvements they made. And it's definitely, I've seen some people be like, why didn't they just do it as an update? And I think a lot of the stuff they've done is not something you could just do as an update to an existing game. I think that they've done work beyond that. And stuff like the AI behavior and bringing in all of the accessibility options that they introduced in part 2 are clear improvements over the remaster. First, for the graphics, it's mostly just more realistic models that has a lot more of the eye technology that they refined in part 2, so that they look like really like human eyes that like reflect light correctly and move correctly versus, PS3 eyes.
Right.
Are just kind of like, don't look at them too hard. And they look fine. And lighting. A lot of like they faked a lot of the like natural lighting in the PlayStation 3 version, and the PlayStation 4 version carries that over. Whereas now they can use because it is all real time now also, versus having pre-rendered video for the cutscenes, they can use just light that works,
Yeah.
It's able to support like rendering light sources coming from places and having it bounce naturally off of things, versus an artist like faking it and pretending that the light is doing that. There are definitely parts that look better, from the models being improved in their animations and lighting that looks better. But I was struck by some of the comparisons being like, you can clearly see that part 1 is more realistic looking.
Right.
Like, this is how it would look in reality. But I would say maybe half the time, maybe more than half the time, I would think, but the original shot looks cooler.
Yeah.
Even if it's not, like, if light wouldn't work that way, or something weird's happening. Like, they have, like, harsher shadows in the first one that, like, would not be how light would reflect those shadows. But they look really cool in, like, the spooky scenes,
I think, and I follow a few people, having gone to arts school, I follow a few people on Instagram who are now in the film world. And they post all the time about how, like, lighting is just, like, a dying art basically everywhere. But particularly in the kind of, like, big budget superhero space, that it just seems like no one is putting any thought or effort into it. And it's just kind of like, it's natural light, but it doesn't necessarily tell the story. And so I think that's an interesting thing to point out here, that sometimes the natural light doesn't necessarily tell the story as clearly as something that is, that wouldn't even necessarily read as obviously stylized, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not necessarily looking at the lighting choices on things and being like, well, that's not how natural light would diffuse. Come on. It's not like, what do I, like, I'm doing math in XCOM. I can't also do, like, particle physics. Come on.
Yeah, so, like, there's clear, like, obvious improvements, like, stuff like fire casts light now, when it really didn't in the original, or other stuff, like ambient lighting, just, like, pretended it didn't really cast light over the environment.
Yeah.
So it definitely looks more natural now, and stuff like fire scenes look cooler. The part where you're running at the beginning with Sarah, I do think that, like, the enhanced fire makes pathing a little bit more natural.
Yeah.
Because the bigger fire makes it more like, okay, I can't get through that.
Yeah.
Whereas you might see, watching people play, like, the first one, they might think, oh, I can still go through here, it's not really on fire over here. And then they get eaten by a zombie.
Oops.
Because they don't want him to go that way.
Yeah.
So there's ways in which, like, enhanced lighting can improve that sort of gameplay experience as well, I think. But it is just like, what did we need this though? I don't know. The first game, regardless of all the improvements I see, where I can be like, clearly this looks better, or clearly this looks more realistic, like they want it to. But, like, even in its ugliest bits, the first game still looks really good to me.
No, I mean, the remaster looks totally fine. I mean, they don't look, like, photorealistic, and I say this with the big caveat of, I haven't played anything graphically intense on the PlayStation 5 that is a PlayStation 5 game. So, no doubt, once Clickbait Boyfriend boots up Horizon Forbidden West, I'll come back being like, never mind, I want to see every hair in Joel's beard. But, it looks fine. right? It looks totally fine. They don't look that bad. They look fine.
Something that struck out to me from initial comparisons to this is that the models in the first game are a lot more stylized than you really realize when you first look at them. But when you put them against, like, really, like, those are human, you're like, oh, it's interesting to see, like, they weren't just, like, trying to make really photorealistic humans. They were making, like, art style choices on these characters that I feel like are clearer to see when you put them against. And one's not necessarily better than the other. I hadn't really thought about that before.
Well, it's an interesting credit where credit is due moment, right? A lot of the narrative around this, I mean, this is always the narrative around this stuff, is like, they had to compromise their artistic vision because of hardware limitations. Which I think just gets more and more eye-rolly, to be honest, with every passing generation. Like, yes, I believe the people who had to fit things onto a cartridge for a Game Boy had to compromise their artistic vision. I don't really believe that someone for the PlayStation 3, whatever, right? Like, I get it. Like, it doesn't look as good as it could. But the idea that, like, they actually had to have that thought of, like, it's not going to be realistic, so how do we stylize it? It's interesting. How do we stylize it in a way where you don't necessarily even notice it's stylized is an interesting thing to consider.
Yeah.
But I mean, overall to me, it seems like it's clear. It's like, yes, of course, this is the definitive way to play the game. It's probably the best way to play the game. And if it didn't feel like the time of studios like Naughty Dog was so limited as it is, I wouldn't have a problem with it. And I don't have a problem with it exactly. It's just like, wouldn't it be exciting for them to make Jak and Daxter instead of this?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding about that, but you know what I mean.
I do. I mean, it has the navigational assistance from part 2, so it's obviously the ideal way to play the game for me, who gets lost in all video games.
Oh my god, I've already gotten lost so many times.
The accessibility features are great, but just for me, who just cannot parse a map, to be honest. Like the navigation, you just press the button and it points you where you're supposed to go. I think all games should have that. I don't care how immersion breaking it is.
Joel keeps picking up maps, and it's like, oh, that doesn't mean anything to me. Again, I think you shouldn't be able to get, like, the navigational assistance is fine. Again, can't emphasize enough. This man has survived zombie fungus for 20 years. So, like, he's not going to get lost.
Yeah, you could get lost. You could be a survivor and also not be able to know where the heck you're going at any time.
But sometimes they're like, we're going to the Capitol building. And it's like, Joel and Tess should know where that is. Whereas I'm like, huh?
I will say the consumer in me it's an odd game to stick the $70 price tag on.
Yeah.
It does come with the Left Behind DLC packaged with it, which I can see as an argument for bringing up the price a little bit, but I think people might have been less upset about it also if it had been the $60 price tag.
Well, it's like Death by 1,000 Cuts, right?
Yeah.
Like, everybody already has a hot take about The Last of Us, and then it's the $70 price, and the PlayStation 5 is inaccessible, and the game is available for free in the remastered version, even if you have the PS5, right? Like, it's a lot of things.
Yeah.
But
haptics, though, baby.
But the haptics, though, baby. I mean, the haptics make any game worth it.
Yeah.
It's also an interesting game to remaster, and forgive me if I've talked about this on the show before, but The Last of Us feels very in line with it's a peak TV story, right? It's a Mad Men, it's a Breaking Bad, it's a Walking Dead. It's not exactly like all of those stories, right? But these, like, middle-aged white man anti-hero type stories.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting in 2022 to bring that back as, like, a flagship remake, especially after The Last of Us Part 2 sort of, like, semi-deliberately shrugged off some of that. I mean, not some of the like peak TV brutality and depression of it all, but at least sort of like who the protagonist was.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting to think about, of with television sort of fracturing into all of this stuff, but I just feel like this story is not at the center of what so many of these stories are anymore. Like maybe something like Succession, but even that is like quite different, I think. It'd be interesting to me to see like when I don't know, like where's the Euphoria, where's the Schitt's Creek, where's the like when are those gonna infect video game storytelling?
Yeah.
Not that I need a lot of like high schoolers doing drugs stories, but you know.
Well, anyway, I liked The Last of Us. I liked The Last of Us Part 2. They both have their issues. But you know, if you're curious about the invention of narrative, and you really like haptics, you know, you could pick up The Last of Us Part 1.
I hope
or
not.
if you don't care about haptics at all, you know, you haven't tried Astro's Playroom yet and awakened your eyes to the haptics.
Not really
you
your
could
eyes,
just get
awaken your hands to the haptics.
You could just play The Last of Us Remastered and also have a good time.
The Last of Us Remastered for me was the anti-haptic, because I tried to shake my controller and it was like, no. It's like, absolutely not. So, mashup. Tactical zombie game, right?
Yep.
I feel like that doesn't really exist.
It doesn't.
I mean, I'm sure there are tactical
really...
zombie games. I'm sorry. I feel like a high-profile tactical zombie game.
A turn-based zombie game doesn't really make sense.
Why not?
Because zombies are just, like, constantly moving. You know?
I thought you were going to say it's because zombies are too slow, so you'd need to have, like, 3 turns to every one zombie turn.
No, I just can't imagine, like, zombies, like, standing still, you know, and, like, waiting for you to take your turn. Like, zombies in my mind are always slowly walking, you know? I guess they run in The Last of Us, so maybe it could just be fast zombies that have to, like, take a break every once in a while.
I guess, but in, like, turn-based games, we're not supposed to imagine that it's, like, literally turn-based, right? Like, these guys are not literally taking turns shooting each other.
Yeah, but it feels more natural in, like, a big war-type setting, you know? Because it's, like... I don't know why it feels more natural. It just does.
I'm wondering if what you're
getting at... Because they're both,
at...
like, thinking beings, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I think you're actually getting at. I don't think... Because, like, The Last of Us sets it up as, like, these sort of, like, war trappings, right? Like, uncomfortably so, almost. Oh my god, that montage where they're like... People are getting sick. The World Health Organization says a vaccine isn't gonna work.
This came out like, far, far before COVID.
I know it did, but it was like very uncomfortable.
It invented world politics.
It invented the concept of a pandemic.
Yeah.
Anyway. But, like, it's treated like it's like a war zone kind of thing, right? Like, I believe that, but I hear what you're saying about zombies. Like, you don't really think of zombies, like, banding together or, like, having the mental facilities to work as a group.
Yeah. Which is honestly probably why The Last of Us has so many human encounters.
Yeah.
Because of that same sort of reasoning.
I'm trying to think of if I could come up with, like, an alternative version of a zombie that could theoretically work in groups. Maybe... Okay. Hear me out.
Like a necromancer.
Okay, so that's a possibility. I was thinking more... It is caused by fungus in The Last of Us, right? I'm not, like...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I was, like... I had thought like that, and I was sort of doubting myself when everybody seemed to get infected from bites. I was like, no, it's fungus. And fungal bites. So it could be a fungus, but more like, you know, like the network of mushrooms kind of way, where they're all kind of one organism.
Plants versus Zombies.
Stop that. No, you're right. Shoot. I didn't even think of Plants vs. Zombies. Plants vs. Zombies is, of course, a tactical zombie game. Okay.
I had forgotten about it until now, too. You reminded me with the mushrooms.
Shoot. Okay, so I definitely can't make it like zombies that are plants. So everyone will be like, this is just a plant zombies versus humans game.
Well, what I was thinking with, like, the idea of a necromancer, it's like you have, you know, like, your squad, and there's actually just, like, one leader, right?
Yeah.
Who is, like, commanding all of these zombies under their control.
Okay.
So you could add, like, an element, like, oh, you just have to take out the leader, right? But first you have to, like, find the leader and deal with any zombies that are in your way of getting to the leader. And they might be setting, like, traps for you if you're on your way there.
Kind of incorporating
you
more
have
of
to
that
contend
stealth-based kind of...
Yeah.
As an option. That's intriguing. The other way around, I think you just create, like, if you try to take, like, The Last of Us and put it in XCOM, I feel like you just create, like, Mass Effect or something, so... Probably not good that way.
Yeah.
There's enough, like, people in space making hard choices stuff out there already.
Yeah.
And not enough tactical necromancy games.
I really think we're missing. There's just not enough necromancy in games, to be honest.
Here's the thing, though. You kind of lose some of the... Like, I'm hearkening back to our game trailers discussion and Dead Island, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the necromancer, you lose some of the built-in, like, pathos and moral dilemma of zombies, right? If it's a necromancer, you can't save those people, right? There's, like, nothing really... I mean, I don't know. Like, come for me if this is wrong here, but there's, like, nothing that wrong with killing those necromanced people. Like, they're already dead. It's probably a mercy to kill them, right? And, like, you can make that argument that it's, like, a mercy to kill zombies, right? But there's no way to save the necromancy people. And so much of the, like, pathos of most zombie things is, like, maybe we could save these people.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that is the central plot of The Last of Us is...
Well, I was trying to dodge The Last of Us specifically, like, even more broadly, right?
Yeah.
Joel does not seem to have too much compunction about murdering as many of these zombie people as he can.
Just people. He's cool. He's cool with murder. But, I mean, the central plot of The Last of Us is, like, trying to save... The idea of trying to save the zombie people. So I get that, yeah.
So I will sprinkle that in as a, like, is there a way for us to inject a little bit more of that, like, things can be fixed kind of situation? Because necromancy, it's like, they're already dead.
Well, maybe in the necromancer, you know? Maybe they have been also cursed somehow and, like, controlled to control these. So there's, like, a greater enemy, you know? But you still have to take out these, like, controlled people doing necromancy on your way there.
Okay, it's interesting. What's the gameplay like?
It's like tactics, you know? But maybe, like you said, maybe with a little bit more stealth. Maybe, like, enemies have to see you before they start coming to attack you.
That makes sense.
So you have to think more about, like, adding an idea of sightlines to the tactics, I guess.
I like it. I'm interested. Okay. Well, listeners, would you buy our zombie Plant vs. Zombies reskin with sightlines? It's necromancy this time. It's people versus necromancers. Do you have thoughts on whether... Well, I hate to even invite this opportunity, but do you have thoughts on whether The Last of Us Part 1 is necessary or good? Have you played it? Has anyone out there played all 3 versions and wants to compare? Have you played XCOM, and have you had to tear yourself away from playing XCOM to even listen to this podcast? Or are you playing XCOM while you listen to this podcast? I think that's a possibility. If you have thoughts on any of those things or anything else we talked about on the show today, you should visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games that are in the hat, and read our blog, featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. You should also hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast, so share your thoughts with us there if you have them. And finally, and most importantly, you should subscribe so you never miss an episode on Sundays at noon. We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app. Overcast, Pocket Cast, really anywhere that you can find podcasts, wherever you found the podcast today, you can find and subscribe to Talk This. Next week it's my side quest, right?
Yep.
So like Halloween games or something, right? This is always my joke. I'm like, what's the seasonal thing? Spooky games. We've probably done horror games already though, right?
You could look. I mean, horror games would be that I would allow that as a seasonally appropriate side quest topic if you wanted to do it.
Do you have veto power? Like, what would you do?
If you were texted me and were like, games that remind us of the falling leaves, I'd be like, no. I'll veto that.
How about candy games?
I don't think there would be enough to talk about there, but we could sure try.
Do you know how long we could talk about Candy Crush and its impact on the mobile game industry?
I guess we could. We could just do a Candy Crush episode.
Anyway, listeners, yeah, it'll be my turn next week, so stay tuned for that. And then in 2 weeks, Emma, what are the games we're going to be talking about?
Our old game is going to be Gran Turismo.
Right, you said that in the weirdest possible way that for a while I was like, what did you just say? Okay.
I think this is probably like the last of like the big driving games that we haven't talked about.
Big driving game year at Talk This, huh?
Yeah. I finally put them in the hat.
Vroom.
And our new game will be Neon White.
I don't know anything about Neon White.
It's a game.
Oh, good. Okay, I sold myself short there because I did actually know that.
There you go.
So,
that's all you need to know.
So, listeners, that'll be our lineup in 2 weeks. And tune in next week for a mysterious side quest, and then for Emma's side quest the week after that, which I think is November, which is crazy. So look forward to that. Think about the falling leaves. We won't do games that remind you of falling leaves, but if you have thoughts on games that remind you of the falling leaves, feel free to send them to us on social media. If I had my life together, I'd write a blog post just to spite you. I'm like, games that remind me of falling leaves. Or candy games. Oh, yeah. Man. I want to do it, but I don't think I'm going to do it. But this is me being like, watch the blog, listeners, just in case you get falling leaves and or candy games. Alright, that's it for our show. Thanks for listening. Emma, do you have a sign-off?
This week, I hope that you hit that 89% shot.